Coolant replacement should be performed every week or every 15 hours when using the DWX-4W wet mill. It is important to be sure the coolant mixture has the proper ratio of distilled water, coolant additive, and chelating agent every time the tank is refilled. This video will walk you through the necessary steps to change the coolant for the DWX-4W wet mill. Open the front cover on the DWX-4W wet mill. Remove any workpieces, including the calibration jig, from the mounting part using the hexagonal screwdriver. Close the front cover. Disconnect the coolant tank from the back of the mill by placing one hand on each side of the coolant tank and gently pulling the coolant tank out from the back of the mill. Do not remove the coolant tank from the rack at this time. Open vPanel on your computer and click on the Settings icon. Then select the Maintenance tab and click on the Drain Coolant button to begin draining coolant mixture from the tubing in the DWX-4W wet mill. Confirm there is no workpiece or automatic correction jig inserted into the mounting part and that the coolant tank is disconnected from the adapter. Then click OK. The drain coolant procedure will begin. This process can take up to 1 minute to complete. Once the drain coolant procedure has completed, reinsert the coolant tank to drain the remaining coolant from the DWX-4W wet mill. Be sure to push the coolant tank back into the mill by pressing firmly against the front side of the coolant tank during insertion. Wait 10 seconds. Then disconnect the coolant tank from the mill. Next, remove the coolant tank from the rack in the bottom cover. To empty the used coolant from the coolant tank, bring the tank to your disposable waste area. Dispose of used coolant in accordance with the governing laws in effect in your local area. Remove the fluid inlet cap and drain the used coolant out of the coolant tank. Slightly fill the coolant tank with warm tap water. Shake the water around the coolant tank and filter, then empty the dirty water from the coolant tank. Repeat this process until the water is clear upon emptying the coolant tank. You are now ready to refill the coolant tank. To refill the coolant tank, you will need the coolant additive, chelating agent, distilled water, a dry cloth, a 1,000 milliliter measuring cup, and a 10 milliliter measuring cup. For a full tank of coolant, you will need 2,850 milliliters of distilled water, 150 milliliters of coolant additive, and 7.5 milliliters of chelating agent. Use the 1,000 milliliter measuring cup and fill the coolant tank with 2,850 milliliters of distilled water. Next, use the 1,000 milliliter measuring cup and fill the coolant tank with 150 milliliters of coolant additive. Use the 10 milliliter measuring cup and fill the coolant tank with 7.5 milliliters of chelating agent. When the appropriate ratio of distilled water, coolant additive, and chelating agent have been poured into the coolant tank, rinse off the fluid inlet cap and use a dry cloth to wipe off the coolant tank. Next, reinsert the fluid inlet cap onto the top of the coolant tank. Return the coolant tank to the rack in the bottom cover of the DWX-4W wet mill. Reinsert the coolant tank by pressing firmly against the front of the coolant tank. Close the bottom cover. Return to vPanel and click on the Reset button in the Coolant Tank section of the Maintenance tab. Click OK to reset the coolant tank usage time to 0. Next, click on the Spindle Run-In Short button in vPanel. Click OK to start the operation. The spindle run-in short procedure will cycle the new coolant mixture through the tubing inside of the DWX-4W wet mill. This procedure will take approximately 2 minutes to complete. Once completed, click OK in the vPanel's dialog box.